Resuming debate, the Honourable Member for Carleton.
Can I just begin? Just start speaking? I don't have to fill out a form or get permission from an agency or a department or some other authority? Aren't we in Canada here? Don't you need to fill out a form or get permission before you make anything, even if it's just making a speech? Well, you need permission for everything else, and you have to wait an awful long time to get it. According to newly released World Bank data, Canada ranks 36 out of 37 nations for the time it takes to get a building permit. You can't just go out and build something, create jobs, and support your local economy. You have to wait for the gatekeepers in order to get permission. Now, you don't have to ask the World Bank that. You could just drive 25 minutes from here and ask Tim Priddle, runs a lumber mill near Manotick. Now, that lumber mill opened a big warehouse about 40 years ago, and guess how long it took to get approved? 1 week, one form, one stamped document from an engineer, one and done, and away you go. And you know what? That big, beautiful building is still standing safely to this day. But he wanted to build another warehouse, similar dimensions, doing similar things. This time, it took 6 years and $600,000 worth of consultants' fees, charges, and other obstructions. In fact, he had to hire an arborist to write a report on each little poplar tree that he cleared in what was actually just useless ditch brush that had never been used for anything before or otherwise and had not been planned to be used for anything else. And yet 6 years, $600,000, 1,500 pages of paperwork it took for him to do that. Money he could have spent creating real jobs. But he experienced what so many experience in this country: life behind the gatekeepers. These are the people who are, I think, among the fastest growing industry in the country. They are the bureaucracies, the lobbyists, the consulting class, the politicians, the agencies who make their living by stopping other people and charging them excess tolls to do anything positive at all. In fact, this government personifies the gatekeeper economy. The very first decision it made on taking office was to veto the privately funded expansion of the Toronto Downtown Island Airport, an expansion which would have allowed Porter Airlines, a Canadian company, to buy $2 billion of Bombardier jets and land them there, creating jobs for another Canadian company, but also reducing traffic by landing business people in the business district rather than having to travel between Pearson and downtown, adding to pollution and delay and killing jobs. And in this case, who were the gatekeepers? Well, of course, the competitor airlines that didn't want to add convenience to this to the customers that would go to the downtown airport if this were approved, and of course the wealthy waterfront condo owners, almost all of them millionaires, and by virtue of their wealth having an excessive amount of political power. And so they killed all the opportunity for the people who would have worked on that project, and the customers who would have saved time, and the people who now have to sit on the roadways between a distant airport and a downtown destination. Not far from there are some more gatekeepers in a place called Cabbagetown. Now, this is a well-off community, leafy neighborhood with beautiful old Victorian brick houses, and along came an entrepreneur and he said, you know what would go well here on this street corner in this very large brick building? A daycare. It had enough space for 80 kids to go to that daycare. And he was prepared to put all of his own money in it, didn't need a cent from the government. Well, suddenly the uber progressive, wealthy elite Cabbagetowners who were against this construction rose up in protest. One man said, and I quote, "This is standard issue capitalism run amok." This man, it turned out, was a mining executive. Columnist Chris Selly actually called him a Marxist mining executive, hilariously. You can imagine this gentleman trying to get a mine approved if he thinks that a daycare is standard issue capitalism run amok. But I guess mines are in someone else's neighborhood. Another neighbor said, this is a slippery slope for this iconic neighborhood. What next, Madam Speaker? A playground? Children laughing? And the noise, one other person complained. One lady said that these kids will be walking within 2 meters of her house. And she signed her submission with PhD. Quiet, children. There's a genius at work in that house. Another signatory was a gentleman named Tiff Macklin. He happens to be the governor of the Bank of Canada, who's been lecturing Canadians on the need for taxpayer-funded daycares, the same kind of daycares that he made a submission to the City of Toronto to try and block. So, typical of the progressive left, they want government to block the provision of a service, and then they claim that the government needs to provide that service directly. But it's not just daycares and airports and lumber mills. It's more essential than that. It's the houses in which we live. A C.D. Howe report produced recently showed that government barriers add between $230,000 and $600,000 per single detached unit of housing in this country. So while the government brags that it's spending $70 billion tax dollars on housing, governments are blocking the very construction of that housing. I want you to think about how insane it is that we live in one of the least densely populated nations on planet Earth. In fact, there are only 4 Canadians for every square kilometer in this country. And yet, we have some of the most expensive real estate. There are more places in Canada where there's no one than there are places where there is anyone. And yet, Vancouver is the 2nd, and Toronto is the 6th most expensive housing market in the world when you compare median income to median housing price. More expensive than New York, more expensive than LA, more expensive than London, England, more expensive than tiny little island nation called Singapore. All of these places vastly more populated and even less expensive to live in. Well, why? Because while our central bankers print money to goose demand, our local governments block the construction and therefore constrain supply. Demand up, supply down, price rises, right? Pretty straightforward. So what are the consequences? Well, it's good for the rich. If you already own a mansion, well, you're getting wealthier every day because your house price is going up. You can sit back and have rocking chair money. Your house makes more money than you do. But if you're poor and you can't find a place to live, like the young people who just told a survey that we came out today, 1/3 of them say they've totally given up on ever owning a house in their life. Those people are out in the cold. Or in Toronto, where a social safety or a social services organization says 98% of homeless shelters space is occupied. Over 300,000 people in one city on a waiting list for subsidized housing. 10,000 people in that one city are homeless. You know, and a lot of people worried about what happened to the homeless in Toronto during this pandemic. In fact, one carpenter took matters into his own hands. Poilievre was a carpenter, and he said these people are going to freeze to death because they can't stay in a shelter where they'll catch COVID. So they're out on the street. With his bare hands, he built mini shelters for them. He put insulation, a smoke detector, a carbon monoxide detector, and he said plainly, this is no solution. It's just something I'm doing to save people's lives until we can finally find a way to house people in this, one of the wealthiest countries on planet Earth. And you know what the city said? They didn't say, we're going to give this guy a hand. Let's give him a round of applause and let's see how we can help him do even better. No, they didn't say, boy, this guy is taking action we should have taken long ago. He's making us look bad. We better perform better than we have before. No, they hired lawyers, and they got an injunction against him. So all of a sudden, the one guy who's selflessly trying to help solve the problem caused by City Hall and by the bureaucracy is the villain. How typically this is of the story we see in our country. Another poverty fighter, Dale Swampy, the head of the National Coalition of Chiefs, which has as its mandate to fight and defeat on-reserve poverty. That's their mission. So they came up with a plan. That was to support a brand new natural resource project that would ship Western Canadian energy to the coast where it could be delivered to the fast-growing and energy-hungry markets of Asia, thus breaking the American stranglehold on our energy exports, creating jobs for steel workers, for energy workers, for logistics and transportation workers, and delivering $2 billion of wages and benefits to Indigenous communities. The CEO of the project was going to be an Indigenous person, and 31 of the 40 Indigenous communities along the route supported it. That's more than 75%. And so the environmental agency responsible took a look, and they spent 3 years, heard from 1,500 witnesses, read 9,000 letters. They reviewed over 100,000 pages of evidence. They went to 21 different communities, and they concluded the pipeline was safe and in the public interest. But the Prime Minister took office, and he killed the project, denying those First Nations communities their constitutional right in the Charter to be consulted. He did not consult with any of them. And so, what happened? These Indigenous communities lost the $2 billion. Now we're being told there's going to be these green jobs the government is going to deliver, right? I asked Mr. Swampy, how many of these green jobs have shown up since the pipeline was killed? Zero. Nada, nothing. In fact, he said the so-called environmentalists did to him what they did to his father's generation 20 or 30 years ago. They came then and campaigned against hunting, trapping, and fishing. And once they were done with their politics and they'd won their political battle, they were gone. And they left behind impoverished communities with less opportunity than they had before. So that was the result. One of the gatekeepers that comes to mind is Gerald Butts. He made hundreds of thousands of dollars working for the World Wildlife Fund, which is a supposedly environmental organization, but instead of spending money on the environment, on preserving wetlands and so forth, they were paying him a multi-$100,000 severance for quitting his job and coming to work for the government, where he has helped to block pipelines ever since. You know, in this country, we live in a country where we can't even trade with ourselves. You know, maybe our friends in the bloc who want to create their own separate country, I don't know, maybe they like it that way, because we don't even treat our own interprovincial trade the way we treat foreign trade. You know, you can get arrested, you can get charged for bringing alcohol across an interprovincial border, even though I'm quoting from our Constitution, all articles of the growth, produce, and manufacture of any one province shall be admitted free into each of the other provinces. That was promised us back at the time of our Constitution, yet to this day, you can be charged for bringing liquor or maple syrup, or you can be charged for working in construction in the wrong province. Do you know, Madam Speaker, that according to Statistics Canada, the effect of these barriers on trade between Canadian provinces works out to a tariff of about 7%. According to the World Trade Organization, the tariff that Canada charges on foreign imports to Canada, 4%. In other words, we charge 7% on goods that travel between provinces and only 4% on goods that come from abroad. So if you order something from Alibaba delivered to your doorstep, it is likely tariffed at a significantly lower rate than if you went out and bought a product that was made in your neighboring province. That is economic hara-kiri, Madam Speaker, that we would punish our own businesses with higher tariffs than we would apply to Chinese businesses that sell within Canada. Raises the question, do you think we could even build the Canadian Pacific Railway today? I'm not sure we could. What about our national highway system? Do you think that could get built today? There'd be some gatekeeper wanting to block it. I mean, if we can't even transit goods across our borders without some parasitical interest group claiming there needs to be a tariff or regulation keeping it out, why would anybody allow a railway or a highway to be built? Forget transmission lines or pipelines. I'm not sure we can get anything done as long as this gatekeeper economy continues to stand in the way. We forget that there was a time when we got things done in this country. This is the country that discovered and isolated insulin, for God's sake, saving the lives of millions of diabetics. We discovered stem cells, which treats cancer and countless other conditions and has the promise to repair spinal cords and bring sight to the blind. We created a mechanical arm that can go into outer space and move hundreds of thousands of kilograms of weight with a remote control, the Canadarm. We conquered Vimy Ridge. We liberated the Dutch. We fought and succeeded at Juno Beach. Of course, that was at a time when if you said, oh, I've been triggered, it didn't mean that you heard a comment that hurt your feelings. It meant that you had been shot at by enemies on the battlefield. That was the generation of that time. At that time, we are a country that once had a government that would stand up and lead the world against apartheid. And now we have a government that's too terrified to speak out against the genocide of the Muslim minority in China. We have today a country where some people seriously talk about banning local kids' sports organizations from keeping score for fear of hurting the losing team's feelings. This is the country, Madam Speaker, of Paul Henderson, who scored the winning goal in the Summit Series with less than a minute left to electrify the world and send a signal in favor of freedom and against communism back in '72. Madam Chair, one day, I believe that we will knock down these gates and remove these gatekeepers altogether to make Canada a place where it's the easiest place on planet Earth in which to build a business, the fastest place to get sign-off to build something, the freest place on Earth in which to do commerce, to buy, to sell, to work, to build, to hire, to take risks, and yes, to even win. How about a budget bill like that? Thank you.